No one talks about this at family dinners, among friends, or on social media. But every mature man who's ever failed in bed carries a heavy silence in his chest. Most blame age, stress, or exhaustion. But what if I told you the problem rarely lies in the body? That, in truth, the most common failure comes from the mind. And worse, from a silent construction that begins long before sex ever takes place. It's tough to hear, but necessary. Many men are failing because they're constantly trying to prove they're still men. Trapped in an outdated model of virility, they carry an invisible weight that kills desire, destroys connection, and turns sex into obligation. This isn't just about erections, libido, or technique. It's about self-mastery, sexual guilt, repressed desire, and all the things left unsaid, now screaming through silence. This video isn't about tricks to improve performance or magic formulas to last longer. It's about truth, about reclaiming your masculine power from the inside out, about how performance anxiety, pleasure addiction, and lack of emotional connection create the perfect storm for failure, and how escaping that cycle demands courage, clarity, and above all, applied stoicism. Here we'll face what others avoid: the mind, the body, the ego, the pride, and the path back to your essence as a man. Every part of this journey matters. A revelation here, a confrontation there. What you need may show up at the beginning, or in the middle, or in a subtle detail near the end. That's why taking in each part with presence is the only way the truth fully lands. Slowly, it all starts to make sense, and what once felt like an unnameable problem finally reveals its cause, its solution, and its meaning. So let's begin with clear eyes and grounded feet, because the first sign that something's off is closer than you might think. 1. The invisible failure, when the body speaks what the mind hides. A mature man rarely admits when he's disconnected from himself. On the outside, he may appear composed, in control, but inside there's a storm. Sometimes the erection fails, and he blames stress, fatigue, or age. But more often than not, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Behind it lies a quiet buildup of repressed desire and an internal conflict between what he feels and what he believes he should feel. This blockage directly affects his masculine power. The body responds to the mind, and when that mind is buried under pressure, unresolved trauma, and old insecurities, no physical stimulus can overpower the weight of the unconscious. Many men try to compensate with external fixes, porn, pills, fantasies. But all that does is mask the deeper issue. What's missing isn't stimulation, it's authenticity, it's presence. Here's a simple example. He's with his partner, she touches him gently, but instead of pleasure, he feels anxiety. That's performance anxiety, a subtle poison that pushes pleasure away and kills connection. The mind races. What if I fail again? What if she notices? And the body goes into defense mode. At that point, desire gives way to fear, and virility disappears into the shadows. The solution isn't more stimulation, it's inner silence. And that begins with recognition. Understanding the problem isn't physical, it's emotional. And to reclaim his strength, he must restore the bridge between mind, body, and soul. An erection is an expression of freedom, not obligation. And it doesn't bloom under pressure, it grows in emotional connection. That's where the true power of the Stoic man enters. Not the one who represses his feelings, but the one who confronts them with courage. That's where self-mastery begins, when a man steps out of denial and starts asking why his body is crying out for help. But curiously, that's just the first symptom of a much deeper wound. 2. The addiction cycle, when pleasure becomes a prison. When a man starts using pleasure as an escape, he enters a dangerous maze. What used to be a moment of connection becomes a compulsion. A pleasure addiction disguised as sexual freedom, but quietly enslaving him. He chases quick relief, but the price is high. Less energy, less focus, less truth, and more dependence. This is the prison many men build with their own hands. Each time he seeks that dopamine hit, the brain floods with reward chemicals. But the more dopamine he chases, the less sensitive he becomes. It's like the entire pleasure system crashes. The result? He needs more and more stimulus just to feel something, and that throws him into a downward spiral of frustration. What was meant to energize ends up draining him. Pleasure stops being a choice and becomes a need. In that space, sexual guilt shows up like a ghost. He feels weak for not being able to stop, and that crushes his masculine power. Worse, he begins to avoid his partner, ashamed of himself, preferring fantasy over reality. Real intimacy demands presence, but he's absent. Fantasy offers control, but real life demands intimate communication. And that confrontation is scarier than any addiction. Breaking this cycle is possible, but it requires radical honesty. It means facing your habits without excuses, masturbating 5 times a week, hiding behind videos, avoiding your partner's touch out of fear you'll fail. These are signs of a man who's lost his center. The solution is simple, not easy, but simple. Pause, observe, breathe, and reduce. The first step to healing is pursuing self-mastery. Replace automatic pleasure with conscious action. Walk, train, talk to other men, clean the soil. And when that inner soil starts to clear, something begins to grow. He feels control returning. He no longer begs for pleasure like a starving man. He shifts from reactive to intentional. And that, my friend, changes everything. But before reaching that place, he'll need to confront an even more hidden kind of pain. 3. The anxious mind kills desire. Most mature men believe sexual failure is about physical strength. But in truth, what paralyzes the body is the mind. When the mind anticipates failure, it blocks instinct. And that's how performance anxiety is born, quiet, relentless, and often invisible even to the man himself. It appears in the moment he most wants to prove his strength. And ironically, it's when he feels the weakest. This anxiety creates a loop of self-surveillance. He thinks too much, feels too little. He's so focused on getting it right that he forgets to be present. The partner becomes an audience, and sex becomes a test. The emotional connection fades. His body tenses, not with pleasure but with fear. What could have been a night of true intimacy turns into a battle of unmet expectations. At that point, many men reach for techniques, pills, or seduction tricks. But without mental control, it's all surface level. A sabotaging mind doesn't need formulas, it needs stillness. Meditating for 10 minutes, journaling, or practicing deep breathing before sleep are all ways to reduce anticipatory tension. The goal is simple: quiet the inner critic that demands perfect performance. A man with emotional resilience learns to laugh at failure. He understands sex isn't about being a machine, it's about being fully there. He speaks to his partner about his feelings, without fearing vulnerability. That kind of intimate communication builds trust, and trust alone melts half the tension. It's in that safe space that desire grows again, natural, spontaneous light. But to get there, he must first break a very old belief, that his masculinity depends on his performance. That's exactly where so many men get lost, because they confuse the act with identity. Yet the journey back to confidence doesn't start on the outside. It begins within, and that path demands a kind of courage most men never tap into. And if this content is helping you see things you'd never noticed before, maybe it's time to support the kind of conversation no one else is willing to have. Like this video and subscribe to the channel, because we're going much deeper. And the next part might just change everything. 4. The body doesn't lie. Signs of a disconnected man. The body always speaks. It shows when it's tired, when it's at peace, when it's aroused, and when it's completely checked out. A lack of desire, frequent erectile issues, or a loss of sensitivity aren't random failures. They're reflections of a man who's lost touch with his conscious sexuality. He may be active in every other area of life, but when it comes to intimacy, his body no longer follows. Because deep down, he no longer lives in his body. Many of these men don't realize what's missing isn't testosterone, it's emotional connection. They live in their heads, worrying about bills, expectations, and social pressure. They forget the body also needs attention, presence, and movement. Does working out help? Of course, but developing body awareness helps even more. Stretching, massage, mindful movement, or even dance and yoga can do wonders. These are the practices that help him return home to his own body. Reconnection happens when sex stops being a task and becomes a shared experience. A dance, a silent language between two bodies. To get there, he has to learn how to listen, not just to his partner, but to himself. How does he breathe with her? Where does he feel tension? Is there pleasure or just performance? That's where emotional unblocking begins, because the body only surrenders when the mind stops micromanaging. This listening process revives what was lost, sexual maturity. Not the kind that pretends to know everything, but the kind that allows itself to relearn. Men who commit to this path start feeling pleasure in even the simplest things. A soft touch gives goosebumps. A kiss carries power. Desire flows again, natural, effortless, like a breeze that doesn't need to be forced. But one obstacle still looms large: pride. Many men would rather cling to the illusion that everything's fine than admit they've lost touch with their vital energy. Until they face that with humility, the body will keep signaling until he finally chooses to listen. 5. The illusion of performance, when being a man becomes an act. From a young age, men are trained to prove their masculinity through strength, conquest, or sexual performance. And that mindset plants a subtle poison. Sex stops being pleasure and becomes a resume. He becomes an actor in his own bedroom, performing a role instead of being present. The constant need for validation kills the essence of pleasure, and authenticity gets buried under pressure. This sexual provider role is a trap. It demands him to be always ready, always strong, always eager. But no one is everything all the time. And when the body falters, even for a moment, it feels like his virility is being stripped away. But it's not the body failing, it's the character collapsing. Because the body is just trying to remind him, you're not a machine. You're human. That pressure creates distance from his partner. Instead of sharing truth, he fakes control. Instead of expressing what he feels, he goes silent. Sex becomes a hollow ritual, no longer true intimacy, just mechanical movements. What should be pleasure turns into burden. What should be connection turns into distance. And sexual guilt grows quietly, eating away from the inside out. Escaping this cycle takes courage to deconstruct and rebuild. For example, talking openly with his partner about fears, insecurities, and real desires. That's intimate communication. Few mature men dare to go there because they think vulnerability makes them look weak. But in truth, that's where strength lives. A man who owns his limits with grace lives applied stoicism. Firmness without rigidity, presence without obsession. And when he starts shedding the character, he rediscovers something that's been missing for far too long. The joy of simply being himself. To feel without obligation. To want without pressure. To love without performance. And in that freedom, sex finds its soul again. But to hold on to that, he'll need to rebuild from something even deeper. 6. Rebuilding the foundation, mind and body in harmony. The turning point comes when a man realizes that caring only for his body, or only for his mind, isn't enough. It's the union of the two that restores his real strength. A man with mind-body integration doesn't need external validation to feel his masculine power. He is whole, and that wholeness shines in his gaze, his touch, the way he breathes around his partner. He doesn't try to seduce, he simply is. That balance starts with small, consistent habits. Better sleep, smarter eating, training with awareness. But also, meditating, breathing, journaling, having real conversations. A man who knows himself can tell when he's tired, when he's excited, and when he's just avoiding his truth. That's real self-mastery. He sees his triggers, his fantasies, his escapes, and learns to redirect his energy with intention. That's where conscious sexuality is born. Not from impulse, but from presence. He's no longer a slave to desire. He becomes its master. He doesn't need porn, multiple partners, or extreme stimulation to feel alive. He finds pleasure in depth, in the lingering kiss, in the touch that says more than words, in the hug that quiets the whole world. That's emotional connection, and it's the new virility. The reward is real. He sleeps better, feels more alive. His partner looks at him with admiration, not for his performance, but for his presence. He lets go of the need to impress and embraces the peace of simply being. In that space, radical honesty flows naturally. He speaks from the heart, listens with compassion, and lives with truth. Sex returns to what it always was meant to be, a reflection of the soul, not a scoreboard. And that's when he finally understands. It was never about doing more, but about being more. More present, more whole, more free. Because when he chooses this path, he doesn't just transform his sex life. He transforms his view of the world, his way of loving, and his connection to everything that truly matters. Now that you've made it this far, the question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you ignore the signs, pretend nothing's happening, or will you take charge of your own story? No man is reborn by accident. Transformation begins when he faces what weakens him and chooses to grow stronger from the inside out. Mind and body don't lie, and they don't lie when they're in sync either. How many times have you tried to fix this with force, without realizing what was missing was inner silence? How often have you chased pleasure, when what you really needed was true intimacy? Maybe now is the time to stop fighting your body, and start listening to what it's been trying to tell you all along. So, are you ready? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Which part of this journey challenged or moved you the most? Leave the phrase, "I'm choosing self-mastery." That one line already shows you're ready to rise again as a true man. Truly, thank you for staying with me until the end of this video. That alone tells me you're not like most. You're searching for something deeper, something real, something soulful. If this content spoke to you, please like the video, share it with a brother who needs to hear this, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. This is only the beginning of a much greater journey, and you're part of it.